Government business, order of the day number 2, National Broadband Network Companies Amendment Commitment to Public Ownership Bill 2024, resumption of debate on the second reading.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call the honourable member for McEwen.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. Today I proudly rise to speak on the Albanese Labor Government's commitment to keeping the NBN in public ownership. This will make sure fairer access for all Australians, whether it's in the city, out in our communities like ours in the suburbs or regional Australia. The Albanese Labor Government is protecting Australians' access to the internet from private ownership. This government knows that high-speed broadband is essential to modern life. Whether it's your 6-year-old using online maths resources to improve their multiplication, or VCE student studying for their upcoming exams, or an aspirational Australian getting re-skilled or upskilled to further their career prospects, the internet has become intrinsically linked to our everyday lives. It makes things easier, more efficient and more connected. But to make sure access remains fair and accessible for all Australians, we need to strengthen the current legislation to make sure that our national broadband network is owned by the Australian people, not some unaccountable private entity. We all know high-speed broadband is essential to modern life. It allows Australians to work remotely, run their businesses more productively, video conference with clients and colleagues, supply and receive telehealth services while enjoying leisure with their families through streaming or gaming. Keeping the NBN in public hands will protect the NBN and public access to high-speed internet for all Australians to come. If we have been taught anything in Australian political life in the last 50 years, it takes a Labor government to protect and build vital national infrastructure. We build, they block, which is why through this legislation and our election promises we've made it clear. The NBN is not for sale. Legislative, it's quite simple. The bill incorporates new wording to make it clear the preservation for the future of the NBN in public ownership being an essential part of our lives. Currently, the National Broadband Act 2011 includes provisions which outline the steps needed to be undertaken for the sale of the Commonwealth of its shares to the NBN Co. The bill removes these provisions from the Act, ensuring the future of the NBN resolutely remains in the hands of all Australians. For those wondering why are we so adamant about keeping the NBN in Australians' hands, by having it in public ownership we protect NBN and guarantee full government support to the ongoing upgrades of the network and to ensure our ongoing regulatory oversight of wholesale pricing. We are making sure that broadband remains available for all Australians. This government has an ambitious plan in the updated Statement of Expectations issued to NBN Co. Put simply, we want to see more of our country better connected to the internet, and the legislation is one of the many changes and improvements the Albanese Labor government has enacted since coming to office to better the NBN. For nearly a decade, ignorance and laziness dictated what happened to our NBN. With the Coalition taking shortcuts and implementing a broadband plan that was outdated before they even put it in the ground. The Coalition refused to see the importance of making sure Australians got an NBN to their homes, not just getting a local node. It's almost as if their apathy and incompetence could be used as an excuse to later trick Australians into wanting to see the NBN privatised. But Australians can see a dodgy job when they see one. We know that the future is best held in the public hands. Instead, when you have a government that actually does their job, like our government is doing, you can already see the benefits to all Australians. We have invested in the NBN by committing $2.4 billion to expand full fibre access to additional 1.5 million premises, including 660,000 in rural and regional areas. From September next year, boosting download speeds by up to 5 times the current speed at no extra wholesale cost. A household or small business with 100 megabits per second plan in 2024 will benefit from 500 megabits per second connectivity in 2025, as well as upgrading the fixed wireless network, including uncapped satellite plans for future needs. And upgrades are already making a real difference in the lives of Australians through faster and more reliable internet access. The government has been ready and has done its job in supporting Australians to have access to the internet, something that the opposition continually failed to do. because they simply gave Australians, especially rural and regional Australians, a lacklustre effort in a job that should have been done properly. The Coalition doesn't understand the NBN and its importance for Australians. It's like they've lost their belief in businesses as well. Do they believe that businesses can operate on a slow and low-capacity internet? Everything being handwritten and mailed or faxed, the Shadow Treasurer knows about faxes, to get to their destination. What businesses can grow and contribute to our economy an internet connection that drops out every 5 minutes? But don't worry, these self-proclaimed experts on small business will make sure your business will have access to a second-rate copper network and a wire to the node. That really makes things easier for businesses, doesn't it? Especially in a competitive environment. For rural and regional Australians, the so-called Party of Farmers does little to advocate for your access to internet, relegating those not in urban areas to the disaster that was the copper rollout. All of this is showing that they have no clue how agricultural businesses work unless they are big corporations with vested interests. If you're one of those corporations, don't worry, you'll be looked after. But if you're a local farmer, local student, small business owner in rural Australia and regional Australia, under a coalition government, any dreams of reliable access to the internet are left at just that, dreams. And then there's national security. In a world where we face many challenges, the very prospect of having foreign actors bidding the highest and potentially owning the critical infrastructure is really unthinkable. Would the alternative government consider compromising our sovereignty just to make a quick buck and hand off their responsibilities quickly? Yeah, it wouldn't put it past them. Imagine being in a position of leadership and doing the easier thing, not taking responsibility for such an integral service that is essential to the future security of our nation. And what are the risks when we talk about privatising NBN? And that's why this legislation is important. To make sure NBN stays Australian-owned and in Australian hands, protecting sovereignty and security for the future of Australians. In our communities of McEwen, we know especially what inaction and apathy towards NBN by the former coalition government meant to our communities. The NBN meant that our residents had their data limited in both the amount and the time that they could use it. Even in the face of a pandemic where average Australians were forced to work from home, those opposite did nothing. They relegated our communities to second-class citizens by preventing them downloading more than 55 gigabytes a month, but that was if they downloaded between 7 a.m. and 1 a.m. under Sky Muster. This had a real impact and put hardship in our community on top of what the global pandemic was already doing. High-speed broadband and working communication services are not just expected to be provided by a competent government, but is it essential for people to engage in work in this day and age. And this was a big reason why the people in our communities viewed the former government as incompetent and out of touch. It was one of many examples of the Liberals and Nationals failing the peri-urban and regional communities of McEwen. Our community also watched as the coalition were too busy focused on leadership spills to government and properly manage the NBN. I suppose that's because from day one they have never supported it. Even in the beginning they actively opposed it. Two former Prime Ministers, Abbott and Morrison, doing their little best mediocre job of implementing it. And those that sit back and remember at this time when they did that sort of Fox studio dance around each other talking about how they were going to limit it to 25 megabits per second. It was so good that even Clark and Dorr made a special about it because they never understood what it's about and what it means to ordinary Australians. Remember Turnbull himself used his own cash to buy fibre to the premises in British Telecom, but then was spending our money on fibre to the node and second-rate copper. The only country in the OECD that was buying copper for broadband was us. For comments made when the NBN was first introduced about how it was just watching videos to show, it shows a complete lack of understanding what it means to Australians. When the coalition were in power, we heard from VCE students in Mernda and Doreen who were finding it harder than their peers in the city to do their study. It's because the coalition's insistence of putting second-rate schemes in and letting the cost of the NBN rollout blow out due to their inability to have competent policies or put words into actions. Our communities were neglected for nearly a decade under the former Liberal government. No matter how many letters or personal appeals to the many ministers who were given communications portfolio, we were completely disregarded by those opposite. In fact, they have the nerve to stand here and talk on this legislation when they did everything to undermine and impede the NBN rollout is a joke. And you don't even need to have a touch of remorse to see what they put our communities through. They were and are just willing to put their heads in the stand. It was evident when Communications Minister Malcolm Turnbull was claiming there has never been more exciting time. While there's never been more an exciting time, was more focused on his career than delivering for our communities. He managed to botch every decision in relation to NBN, riddling it with mismanagement and neglect for the 2 years that he was in the job. Remember his famous statement that he made back in the 20th of March 2014. This was the Communications Minister in the Liberal government. If connectivity is so important, why would you buy a house when there was no broadband? Almost as good as if you want a good home, get a better job or get rich parents. It was old 11-ty Joe Hockey said. McEwen under the coalition government has always been an afterthought, left to get the scraps from the inner city and the big corporations. They stopped the rollout of the fibre NBN and had enough copper to go around the entire planet 1.5 times. They produced a degraded system at double the price they said it was cost. The city of Whittlesea had already put pits and pipes in the ground for fibre optic, but they were left empty because those opposite decided that we weren't good enough to get fibre to the premises. Did in their own seats, but as we know, pork barrelling is a specialty for those opposite. Their time in government was defined by their incompetency, but their NBN rollout was really a crowning achievement. It deemed by many commentators as a national tragedy. You would think that losing government would have given them a little bit more humility and care, maybe even making them appreciate the NBN. But we see the comments made by opposition that really that's not the case. One of their self-confessed best and brightest, the member for Casey, tell his story about the CFA volunteers not being able to send SMSs during the June storms of 2021. 2021, they were in government, in which case he missed was that particular time. But he's confusing NBN services with mobile broadband. No wonder they seem to want to give it away to the highest bidder. It's better than them admitting they simply don't understand the importance of this. We also heard from the member for Flinders saying the quiet part out loud. Even though the Shadow Minister has been in damage control and saying there has no intention of changing ownership of the NBN, the member for Flinders went on Sky News and said, and I quote, "It has always been in the compensation it would be privatised when the time is right." They can't even get their story straight. During their time in government, we've seen Australia ranked fall down to 65th in the world in 2022 for broadband access and usability. 65th. It is just unfathomable that they could do that. They just seek to sow confusion amongst Australian people. They can't stick to their party lines and they don't even know little about the programs they're talking about. The NBN is a Labor initiative because Labor builds things. We build for the future. They just block and wreck. And we understand the importance of it for all Australians. We understand the importance of NBN for both the economy and for the security of our nation. This legislation not only keeps the NBN in Australian hands, but makes sure the Australian government does their job and makes the NBN fair and accessible for every Australian. You would think that this is important, that we wouldn't have this delay. But once again, we see the coalition of no's, the Liberal Party, the National Party and the Greens lining up together, and we see the Greens now want to delay this bill from even passing even further. You would have thought, with what had happened in Queensland, they'd started to look up and say, look, we better start working for the betterment of the nation, not for themselves. But alas, that's not the case. This bill should go through. It's important that it gets passed. It's important because we need to know critical infrastructure like the NBN remains in public hands to make sure we don't go through all the problems we've had in the past where we've seen privatisation of the likes of Telstra and, of course, our power companies in Victoria, which has made prices more and more expensive. It is our government that works to build this nation, to make sure we put the things in place that people need, when they need it and how they need it, and it's time the coalition got out the way, got on board and started supporting us. Because without this, we risk further and further seeing things sent off to private enterprise which will then just run amok through our communities. We already know after 9 years of neglect the infrastructure that they failed to deliver to Victoria to actually help things get done. We're seeing the problems that's caused now today. So you can be sure that if a coalition government got back in, this would be one of the first things on the chopping block, because they want to make sure they can flog things off as quick as they can. It's in their DNA. It's always in their DNA. Superannuation, Medicare, everything you look at that we have done, they have done everything in their power to get rid of it and to spoil it, and we are going to make sure that this vital piece of infrastructure that needs to be here for now and into the future remains here in our public's hands.
Call the Honourable Minister.
Thanks, Deputy Speaker. I move that debate on this bill be adjourned to a later hour this day.
I put the question. All of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it.